All right, good morning, everyone. Hello. Welcome to Find Free Libraries, What, Why, and How. My name is Courtney Brown, and I'm the Southeast Regional Coordinator from the Indiana State Library's Professional Development Office. I'll be the host and question moderator today. Our presenters this morning are Ruth Frasur from the Hagerstown Public Library and Scott Tracey from the West Lafayette Public Library. I'd like to start off the webinar with a few announcements. To register for other webinars or other trainings available from the Professional Development Office, please see the Indiana State Library's events calendar, which can be found on our website at www.in.gov/library. For a full list of our current in-person training menu, please see our continuing education website. The Indiana State Library has many ways we try to stay connected to library staff across the state. For weekly updates on upcoming trainings and to learn more about what's happening in libraries across the state, please subscribe to our weekly e-newsletter, The Wednesday Word. We also offer a blog which provides information about the Indiana State Collection, interview spotlights on library staff from across the state, and information about upcoming events at the Indiana State Library. If you have a question, just type it in the chat box on the upper left side of the screen. I'll be watching and I'll get your questions to Ruth and Scott as soon as there's a good opportunity. There should also be some time near the end for questions as well. This session is 1 hour, so you'll get 1 LEU for today. After the presentation has ended, please stay logged in to receive your LEU. I'll also be posting a link to a survey about the presentation. Please fill that out and let us know how we're doing. So again, please stay logged in at the end of the presentation for access to your LEU and the survey link. If at any point during the webinar you experience any sound issues, please see the sound issues box just below the chat box on the left side of the screen. If there's a global sound issue, we will announce it in the chat pod. If you're unable to resolve the sound issues you're experiencing, we are recording this meeting and you can watch it online after the meeting has ended. So again, if there's a global sound issue, we will make an announcement in the chat box. So again, welcome to Find Free Libraries, and I will turn this presentation over to Ruth and Scott.
Thank you, Courtney. We'll go ahead and start the thing. Courtney, there we go. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us. And some of you, I also meant to send out an email thank you. We had sent out a survey asking about whether or not you are a Find Free Library or not, and we actually got 50 responses, which I was very pleased with. So if you are one of the people who filled out that survey, thank you so much for doing that. We're going to go ahead and get started. We'll probably buzz through these first slides pretty quickly because as we get further in, they get a little bit more intense as far as information goes. So, Find Free Libraries. Of course, we've already talked about Scott Tracey is here. He's the Assistant Director at West Lafayette Public Library, and I am Ruth Frasur, the Director at Hagerstown Library. Get started just by talking about what is a Find Free Library first. This has been an ongoing discussion in many of the sessions that we've been in, as well as just meetings with directors and other managers of departments, where we needed to define specifically what fines are. They are for returned, overdue materials, not for lost and unreturned materials. And they are not fees that are associated with card replacement and all the things that we charge fees for. This is something that we'll talk about as we get further on, that both our staff as well as the public do not necessarily understand what fine refers to. We are talking in this case specifically about money assessed for overdue materials that have been returned. As we're talking about Find Free Libraries, we also need to figure out what we're talking about or who we're talking about. Are we talking about overdue fines for specific audiences, whether they are students, juveniles, adults, everyone? Or are we talking about for specific formats, books only, DVDs, everything but this or that? And so those are things that, as you are thinking about a fine-free library, you may have the freedom to decide more things or not based on whether or not you're in a consortium, based on what your software will do, based on what your board says that you have the permission to do.
Yeah, and speaking of consortium, if you're in one, different rules might apply as far as how you charge for overdues. For instance, in Evergreen, it's the circulating library, not the owning library, whose fine rules apply. So if you, like I said, if you're in a consortium, you want to make sure that you are playing within the rules.
Right, and that may be also, maybe you're in some informal agreement, you're in a county where there are multiple libraries, and even if you're not in Evergreen, Indiana, or whatever, you've decided we're going to do this or we're not going to do this. So we'll talk about communication pretty soon when we get to that, or what's overdue everything. This is, in my mind, of course, I always ask why. I've been doing that for a very long time. Why do we want to be fine-free? Somebody said, oh, you're really nice. Well, we like to say we're nice, but that's not really why we decided that. But do we want to rely on bad behavior to pay the bills? This was an existential question that I had as I was actually driving to work at one point and wondering whether I was going to get pulled over for speeding, and then thinking about how the towns get money from speeding tickets to pay for their operating. Are we doing that same thing, relying on people breaking the rules? And are we undermining the public trust in sound policy? Have we made a rule that we know people are going to break so that we can then make money off of them, first of all? And are we also setting them up for failure? And if we're setting them up for failure, how are they going to trust us to make policies that are beneficial for them? And then who are we disenfranchising or alienating with our overdue fines? Actually, was talking with Scott about this earlier about my own experience as a kid growing up. We didn't have much of anything, and we relied on the public library for entertainment. We went and we checked out just hundreds of books, not all at one time, but just everything we could carry. There are 5 kids and our arms were full. And inevitably, we returned things late. And of course, then we also accrued fines. And so there was a point where we didn't have the money to pay the fines. We didn't have the money to do much of anything. And our access was cut off from the library because of that. A point for like a year, and we started scrounging around for the change in the sofa and doing all of these things, and we're able at one point to pay those off, and that was like a great day. We weren't like, there wasn't any animosity toward our library, but we were alienated from using that service. Who are we alienating now with our overdue fines?
Yeah, 2 quick thoughts about that. One is there is an element of good PR. In our library, we have lots of young parents who check out books. They could check out 50, 80 books at a time, and if you're charging a quarter a day per item, that can get very expensive very quickly. And it sort of levies this incredible burden right in the place you don't want to, with young families, young kids. And also another thing I noticed while sort of doing the initial look-see on whether this was possible is, if you look at what's owed you and what you actually collect, those 2 numbers, at least in our case, were very different. So a lot of that money you're not going to see anyway. So you have kind of a negative PR and also you're not really getting all that money that you're owed. So that's something to consider when doing the beginning look into whether you want to do this or not.
Absolutely. So one of the things I talked about being in the car and thinking about the police officers that were probably out there seeing me go 7 miles over the speed limit, and thinking about that operating fund. But then the other thing was I had the opportunity, and it was a necessity. I ended up working the circulation desk for about a week, which was unusual. I generally have wonderful people as frontline staff, and I get to do my office work. But this was one of those weeks where I was covering a lot of shifts, and I noticed. So this view that you see here is actually the view that all of our circulation staff have. I'm standing actually at the circulation desk looking at this door. And that week, every single adult that came into the library, bar none except for the mailman, apologized because they either had forgotten a book at home and knew that it was due. They knew that they had fines on their account right now from previous things. They weren't sure if they were going to be able to return that one thing. They all apologized for something that was related to our fines. And as I'm watching these people come in who I know, we have a small library and we know just about everybody that comes in, and we're excited when we don't know somebody. As they came in, and I'm thinking, these are our neighbors, these are the people that we see regularly, who love the library, who we are invested in. For them to enter into this conversation apologizing, I was actually a little dumbstruck about how we and our policy was setting up this negative interaction for what should be the best part of their day. So we started thinking really, really heavily about this. And in our case, we are a member of Evergreen, Indiana. And this came at the same time that there was talk about a fine-free pilot program. Now, your beginning is not going to be the same. It's going to be whatever sparked that thing, whether it was a PLA session or just you sitting at home on the patio thinking, why are we doing this? Or getting a traffic ticket or whatever. Your beginning is going to be different, but there has to be a beginning.
And so part of that, when we started looking at it, was two aspects. One was budget, one was technical. What can your ILS handle? Do you want to do fine-free for everybody, certain types of cards, certain types of shelving locations, whatever it is? So you have to start with what your ILS is capable of doing once you have an idea of what you want to do. The second thing is, again, going back to the budget, looking at, well, how big a piece of the operating budget are your fines? Can we afford to lop this off in one easy process, and we can absorb that? Also, I also looked at breaking down your income, your fine income. There's this, you'll start with a large number, but if you're capable of running reports, and those of you who are in Evergreen can reach out to me. I'll be happy to show you how we did it. How much money is owed to you in overdues versus the rest of your fines and fees? What percentage of it is overdues? And also then, as I said earlier, I was shocked to find out how much money we simply are owed and are not getting. It was a large dollar figure. It was also a more surprising as a percentage of that. So that is not money we're going to get. So we really had to look at what really we were going to lose by going, say, fine free, overdue free.
Okay. So, and Scott has alluded to this kind of process at West Lafayette. It was a little bit different than ours, but not so much. And you will find that it will be like this for you. First, you need to define why you want to do this. If you don't know why, and it just sounds like a good idea, but you haven't convinced yourself, if you're the person that's going to be presenting this to the board and the community, then you're not going to convince them. So you need to have in your mind defined reasons why fine free is appropriate for your library, your community. Then the next is the how, and that's, of course, where we get into what Scott was talking about. What can your ILS do? What does your policy need to look like? This is where you start defining, are you going to make everything fine-free? Are you going to only do juveniles? I got a survey result back from a library that said that they are fine-free for juveniles on their bookmobile. And this is going to be something that you choose locally, but then there are going to be some best practices. And I've been really happy, not just with the fine free thing, but then also with people asking questions about, how do you do this? What about this? How does this change when something goes to lost? Which that's something that changed for us. Previously, it was 45 days that something was overdue before it went to lost. Now it's 28 days. And so that those things will change in the way we communicate. So how are you going to do that? I wish that there was a way to say, this is exactly how you do it, except for you are making local decisions. And so there are going to be fine nuances to that how. And so it does rely on you as professionals as well to make those local decisions, and then also reach out and, we do this all the time. We modify what somebody else does to fit our local situation. And then this tends to be the easy part. Once you have done the why and the how, then it's the when. How are you going to launch this? When is that going to happen? Are you going to make it a big deal? Is this going to be a soft rollout, or are you going to have a bunch of fanfare with it? And again, that kind of fits into that how, but there has to be, again, not just a beginning for the thinking about it, but a beginning for the doing of it. If you saw on our introductory slide, our library, we launched this program in March of 2016 as part of that Evergreen pilot, which has now just gone into policy for Evergreen, Indiana, for those libraries that opt in. For West Lafayette, their start date was January 1st of this year. And we both handled it differently, and every library is going to handle that differently. This is, in my mind, and I'm having worked through some things with Scott for his library too, I know that this is the absolute 100% most important part of this. Scott alluded to the fact that you need to know the numbers. For our library, and actually for just about every library where I have asked this question and gotten a response, we find that the income that comes from fines is right about 1% of your operating budget, and it scales pretty reliably between that 1 and maybe 1.2%. For our library, it was actually 1.1% overdue fines. Now, at that point, our operating budget was $280,000 a couple of years ago. And so as we were looking at that, our overdue fines in there, it actually looked a little bit more than it was. And then Scott talked about breaking it out into what are overdue fines, what are lost fees, things like that, and that's where we came up with then that 1% ish. Yeah.
Yeah, and a note on that, to prep for the webinar yesterday, I ran a report on our fines. I ran 2013 through 2017 total fines. Those aren't fees, but those are fines, which would include lost as well as overdue, lost or damaged. So between 2013 and 2017, I took an average of January 1st through yesterday, and then between 2017 and 2018, I can tell you we're about 42% less down from that. So there could be, and this will be more or less depending on your situation, but there could be a big or a noticeable hit to your operating budget. Again, 42% of what we're getting, again, that could be, it's not doable for us. Again, how much, to what Ruth said, how much of your operating budget are your fines? So if it's 0.5%, then 42% off isn't going to be as big of a deal if it's 1 or 2%. But just to be cognizant of that. And those are numbers you're not going to know about till you get into it, and probably a couple years down the road. So that's just, something to think about.
And that was one of the things that, as we were looking at it, we looked at the exact number, and it was going to be around $5,000 that we were anticipating losing. And I'm sitting here doing air quotes with losing, because one of the things that we were looking at was not just what revenue we're not getting, but thinking of that as an expenditure. What are we getting by not bringing that money in? What are we then buying with that? But before you can get to those kind of philosophical things, you need to know what the numbers are. That's a real consideration, because you're going to be then going into your board and talking to them, not just in a qualitative way. What are the great, warm, fuzzy things that we get from this? But what are the quantitative things that we are giving up with this? And so it needs to be a very well articulated, and also an authentic conversation with that you're having with them. It's easy to try to play off that money, but it is an important thing. I mean, we are relying, of course, on taxpayers to pay the large amount of our operating with their property taxes and all the other things. And it's very easy to look at this fine and say, well, that's going to somehow make their taxes less or whatever. I mean, we all know how the money rolls around in our head and the things that we say. And so we need to be able to know what those dollars and cents are and articulate that well to our board.
And also there comes in, you're going to have to come up with a policy.
Yep.
And I'm happy to share ours if you just reach out to me if you want to see ours. But what is, for instance, when does something transfer from overdue to lost? I think all modern ILS systems will have a setting where it goes from this is overdue to this is lost. Ours is evergreen is 28 days. If you go, fine free. Then for those of you who use a collection agency, when does the collection agency declare it completely gone? They go start their process where they suddenly been referred to a collection agency, and you get a call from your patrons and this and that. And then how do you set that? How much time from the time your ILS considers it lost till the time your collection agency gets a hold of it? What happens if they return the item that's long overdue and been marked lost? Do you still charge them for the item, or do you just take it back as long as it's in good repair? Do you charge them, for instance, with us, the $10 fee that the company that handles that for you? For us, it's Unique Management. We'll charge the library to process that. When are their cards suspended? How do they get it back? I mean, there's a whole bunch of things to consider. And like I said, I'm happy to share a policy. Just reach out to me and I'll send it to you. But there's not a one size fits all on that. It's a lot of moving parts to it, and it's going to depend on a lot of home rule and a lot of your consortium.
And Scott's going to remind me of the policy in just a second as well, because I want to bring something up about that, but not quite yet. This is the next thing, and something that, as I was looking through the survey results, and also from these anecdotal conversations I've been having with librarians over the past couple years, this component right here is one of the most important. First of all, because that phrase frontline, these are the people who are going to be interacting with the patrons. They're the ones who are going to be communicating the policy. And for me as a director to be able to sit in my office or at my desk and understand the philosophy and the reasoning behind a fine-free policy is great. And if I've gotten my board on board, and they've, of course, they resolved to do this, because that's what it requires, the board resolution, that's great. But if the frontline staff doesn't get it, doesn't want it, there's going to be a problem. And so communication with frontline staff is one of the most important things that you can do. And another reason why that why has to be firmly implanted in your mind. Now, we can always come back and say, well, I'm the boss, they do what I say. Yeah, okay. That is true, but it's their mindset behind this is going to inform their behavior on that front line. And it's going to determine how well they implement this policy, how they talk to that person who is chronically late. All of those things. This is a very, very, I can't underline it. I didn't underline it, but I probably should have, bold with like fireworks there. Staff, frontline staff needs to be communicated with. They need to also have their opinions heard, and there needs to be a conversation about that. And then, of course, the public. Now, this is where I want to come back to where Scott was talking about that policy that has all of those hows in it. How are you doing this? Because that policy is going to work for the conversation that you have. You're going to now have those loan durations, if they have somehow changed or whatever, stayed the same, you're going to be talking about them a lot more, because before they'd say, oh, it's 3 weeks and I'm going to get a fine. Well, if you're not getting a fine, you still have to talk about the 3 weeks, because there still is an expectation that it's going to be returned and somebody else will have a chance at it, or there's a hold placed on it, or if it goes to overdue and it's overdue for 28 days, then it's going to lost, not just long overdue, but to lost, and then we have other issues. And also the fact, if it does go to the collection agency, that fee that is then assessed is not a fine. So they could have gone to the collection agency. They could even return it and have the fines forgiven, but they're still responsible for the fee, that $10 unique management fee or whatever it is for whoever you're using. So this communication becomes really important. The other thing is there's going to be this neighbor that doesn't like that neighbor and thinks that that neighbor should have to pay overdue fines because this neighbor behaves better and is whatever. And so there has to be communication with all of our community members about why we think as an institution this is a valuable part of our policy, what we as a community are gaining from it. So, and I think that as we get into the questions very soon, that this is where it's going to revolve around. It is going to be around the communication
Yeah, and
aspect.
there's a big touch point between the staff and the public. When you decide to do this, are you just automatically going to forgive all fines going backwards forever?
Oh, that's right.
If not, like what we did, we forgave half of fines, overdue fees, sorry, up through December 31st of 2017. So now the staff has to be able to look at the book. Why do I have overdue fees? If you said you got rid of them, why do I have this? How come it's half? What is that all about? So it can get a little tricky, and you want to be able to explain it in very simple terms. Like I said, if you do what Ruth did and just dumped all past due overdues, then that makes it real easy.
When they came in, we didn't just do it like carte blanche, but when they came into the library, if they had overdue fines, we forgave those and said, okay, now you have a clean slate.
Yeah. But by and large, the public, to go back to the public is very happy. Very few people will complain when they don't get an overdue fine.
Did you have people complain about other people, though?
Oh, we did. There's some part of your public, and I'm sure every library is going to have this, that believe that if you break the rules, there should be some sort of punishment. And that's you're going to have opinions all over the place. I don't see public libraries as police officers. I don't want to be punitive toward people. Like I said, if you just steal something or take something or whatever, that's different from oops, I forgot. But generally speaking, people because I still work the CERT desk fairly often, will mostly try to return something. So that other people can get. I hear that a lot. Well, let somebody else have it, or if they have something on hold, they don't want it anymore, they'll call and say, I don't need this anymore. You open it up for other people. So then that all drills into some people are built one way and some people are built another way. But by and large, and I guess that goes back to the earlier point that we're going to somehow modify human behavior by having a fine or not having a fine.
Right.
I just don't see that as, people will walk in and take things, and other people won't do that. So,
well, we had that discussion earlier too. That there are still going to be people who don't return things, and the vast majority of people are still going to return things on time. And one of the things that we also talked about is the fact that librarians, and that's talking about me, Scott a little bit, and a lot of you, we are the absolute worst when it comes to returning things on time. Now, is it because we don't get charged fines by our institution? Well, yeah, that's part of it, but it's also that thing saying, I'm going to get to it, I'm going to read it, and then we don't because we don't have the time to do it. So, are we somehow are we expecting more from our patrons even than we are able to do? So that was a question I was asking myself looking at those two new books that I'm trying desperately to finish before I return them and renewing them and trying to practice the things that I have expectation for our patrons. The other thing that I didn't hit on earlier that I wanted to is, and it refers to the interaction between staff and public. Back at that slide that talked about how I had heard apologies from every single person that walked through the library when I was at the CERT desk. Prior to that and following that, it was my staff that was hearing those apologies, but was also having to field every complaint about, no, I returned that on time. I don't have that money. What can I do to work this off? All of those things. And so not only was the public set up to fail, the interaction between my frontline staff and the public was set up to be negative. So that when we removed that one piece, those overdue fines, it changed the conversation, the type of conversation that the staff was able to have with the public. It started with, oh, don't worry about that. We'll take care of it. We don't do that anymore. And then it became, well, let's get this book and let's get this book. Don't worry about that. We're going to have a positive interaction. It has changed the way that my staff comes to work because they already know that they're going to have a good time. Most of the time, there's always going to be some other situation that has nothing to do with fines, but they're going to have a good time being at work dealing with the public rather than constantly this slog of you owe this much money, you need to do this, I don't know if you return it this way and that way, whatever. So it changed that conversation. So there's that as well. Now, that is what we have right now. What questions do you have?
So, Ruth, when you were talking before, a few people asked about policy. Would you two be interested in sending that policy to me and I can send it out to attendees?
Yeah, that'd be no problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Mine, unfortunately, is not on this computer, so it will be in the next couple days. There also is, if you are an Evergreen library, there is a portion in the Evergreen, Indiana. Well, actually, it's not just if you're an Evergreen library, because anybody can look at it, that refers to the fine-free program as well. That is appropriate. And there are some other libraries around that are, I know that Sullivan County is fine-free. That's Jordan Orwig, so he would be somebody to contact if you're looking for more policy. But yeah, we would definitely be willing to send our policies and have those distributed.
And then someone mentioned they didn't even think about getting staff on board. They were more focused on their board of trustees.
Well, and so, yes, because we naturally, as administrators, are looking to our board to give us the permission to do things. And speaking personally, a lot of times, which I'm learning, hopefully, well, to not do this so much, we say, okay, we have the policy, the board says so, now we just got to do it. But the quality of work that we expect from library employees is not so much about you just got to do it. I mean, we are a customer service oriented field, and a lot of that is built on us being excited about serving the public, which means that they need to understand, they need to buy into that. And I was actually talking to someone from Bartholomew County at one point, where one of the issues that, and I don't remember exactly who it was, but one of the issues that they were having in this conversation was that they had some employees who were angry. And this is not just Bartholomew County, this is other libraries have heard this. They were angry that patrons weren't going to be punished for not returning things on time. And that's real, especially if you've been there for a while and you've seen constant abuse of it. That starts to build, and there starts to be this kind of need for justice. But is that how we can, all of those things need to be factored in. We have to get our staff's buy-in. They need to understand why justice at the circulation desk is not creating this sense of community of learning that we're wanting to do.
So someone had a question, don't people take advantage of this?
It goes, yeah, yes. Yes and no. People take advantage of the library. In our library, and I can't speak to West Lafayette, but I'm sure that Scott will, we have not seen an increase in complaints about things not being on the shelf because people kept them out longer. At all. In fact, we have heard more, and this is, of course, is anecdotal, we have heard more people say, I'm just going to go ahead and return that and I'll check it out later because I know there are other people waiting.
Mm.
Rather than, I just need to keep it. I know I'm going to have to pay $1 or something for it just so they can get that last whatever. So we've actually heard more conversations surrounding that kind of sharing economy than we ever did previously, because people are thinking about, okay, I have this, and now the next person needs it, and I'm going to rely on them. One of the things that that I articulated to my board was that we are by and large dealing with adults, but we're trying to treat them like children. If you don't do this, we're going to punish you. I mean, that's something that we came up with as children. And as we get to be adults, then there's this level of respect that we expect. I'm an adult. I can do things right. Well, then we need to then extend that respect to our patrons. You're an adult. You're not going to get in trouble for this unless you do it really, really bad. You lose something, you're long overdue. But if you're a few days late, okay, you're an adult. We're going to rely on you to get that back. And we're going to rely on you, if you don't need it, to return it early even. So there's that. Yes, there are people who are going to take advantage, but they are the people who were already taking advantage. They were the people who were running up those fines at one library and then finding a way to go to another library, finding that one person that wasn't going to check everything and setting up a new card or whatever. There will always be those people, but by and large, most people are not like that.
Ruth's right. It's hard to discuss this in any way that's not anecdotal. It's hard to get actual data on people's behavior. But I can tell you this, and this is anecdotal, but I witnessed it happen. It's not a zero-sum game. For instance, we had a patron who was a young parent. They come in all the time, this couple. Their fines were waived, but she was thrilled about that, so she bought a lifetime membership from our friends group because she said, I should give something back. So there's also that. That's very hard to quantify. But there's a goodwill. Where I've heard, again, people say, I think my overdue fees are funding this library, which is, even though they're paying it and they're still coming back, that's not what you want to hear either. So these are all things to consider, and that gets very murky because you can't just run a report for that.
Right. Well, and we've actually had patrons like that come into that said, well, I want to pay my overdue fines. Well, we don't have a mechanism anymore to gather those. But if you want to pay into our gift fund, if you want to volunteer time with our friends group, here are all these positive ways that you can contribute as an individual to the library that aren't based off of us saying, oh, you're a bad person, now you need to give us money to make that right. Mm-hmm. There is a group of people who want to contribute, and they have been contributing based on bad behavior, which is very backward and kind of strange. And they're at a bit of a loss now because, well, if I'm not contributing through my overdue fines, how do I do that? Well, now we get to talk about all these positive things that they can do. So there's that. But yes, people will take advantage. They're the same people who always were.
Great. We have a lot of questions coming in. Next one. We're fine-free for all books, but we do charge late fees for DVDs. This is mostly because we're one of the only places in town to get DVDs, and they're all in high demand. I'm not sure we could waive those DVD fines and still count on getting our DVDs, particularly the new ones, back in a timely fashion. Do you have thoughts about that?
Well, that's something that, again, going back to,
that's a local
that's
decision.
A home rule, local decision. You have to, that's the thing you're going to have to think of yourself. For us, we don't do that. It's fine free for everything, but I don't think there's a right and wrong for that. If you're observing this, then Or you could try it for a month and see, does it impact negatively? If not, you're gonna have to do it. But then that opens up a political thing. People get used to this. Well, you're fine free, now you're not. Now you are, you're not. So there's a lot of
That goes back to the
questions
communication
about that.
component.
Yeah.
But if you're not sure, Scott brings up the absolute perfect solution: do a pilot. And I mean, we started out as the pilot for Evergreen, Indiana, and there were at that point, I think, 115, 112 libraries. And everybody was really, well, not everybody, but a lot of people were really enthusiastic about the idea of it. And we were the only library in the pilot program. It is, especially starting out, you don't know. And so if you're looking at that DVD collection saying, oh, they're just going to bleed us dry, we're not going to get anything back, we have to rely on that for that behavioral component.
Great.
Pilot,
Next
yeah.
question. Did the amount of overdue items increase when you went fine free?
I will say that I do not know that answer. I don't know that in a quantitative way. What we actually did, rather than looking at the numbers, and this is going to change everywhere, based on your board, based on your staff, based on your own self. What we were interested in more than those overdues was if people were able to get the things that they wanted. And we based that off of conversations that were had at the circulation desk. This has been out for so long. This has been whatever. And we did not see any type of increase in that. People complaining about the things that they wanted not being available. These are local things. Of course, at Evergreen, Indiana, we can go and we can order them from other libraries. But this is mostly new items that wouldn't go through that. We didn't have anybody complain, like 0 people complain about not being able to get something that was overdue on somebody else's account. So,
great.
We did have that before.
Does the income from replacements due to the shortening of the lost item policy help make up for lost revenue from no fines? What are other ways the library can adjust the budget to absorb that income?
For us, no, it doesn't, because we have a local policy that if somebody returns a lost item, an overdue item that has gone to loss, they return it, we actually will forgive that fee that's on there, so we don't collect it. But people have been good about returning the things. So we have not seen that income shift. And I think that that's an important component to look at, that there's this mindset that if we don't get money here, we're going to get it somewhere else. That is not necessarily the case. We did not see a large increase in people coming in to use the copy machine and the fax machine. We did not. That is money that we planned for it to be gone, and it is essentially gone. So, and that's an important thing. If you're looking at 1% of, this is a silly number, but a $25,000 budget, that's a lot less than 1% of a $3 million budget. And so the way that we looked at that was that we were spending on a PR campaign, a really good PR campaign, and a really good customer service training for our staff. That's how we talked about it, and because that's essentially what it was. Now, if I'm paying $5,000 for that, it's easier to justify
than $30,000. So, or $45,000. Now we're talking about a staff person. So how are you going to get that mindset? Is there some way to make up that revenue? I have not found that, but we have less resources for that. So that, of course, is going to be a very local thing as well.
We adjusted, well, in Evergreen, lost, if you go fine free, goes down to 28 days. So we adjusted the time that it goes to collections so that it doesn't go to collections any sooner. When we went to fine free, I think it was 40 days. It used to be where it got marked lost, and then when we went to fine free, it's 28 days.
Yeah.
So I just called up the collection company and said, I think it's 60 days. It goes to collections. It's still the same amount of time before you get sent to collections. And like Ruth was saying, if you bring the item back and it's in good repair, we'll waive everything except the $10 collection fee, which that's a long time.
But you haven't seen an increase in revenue from lost material, have you?
No, I can tell you overall we're down, but I don't see that. I mean, when we got rid of the overdue fees, there's some income you're going to lose. And again, how much your mileage will vary on that. But no, I don't see an uptick in doing it. And remember, I mean, the average checkout, a book checks out for 3 weeks.
For a Evergreen library.
Right, for us.
And two renewals.
And then you can do up to 2 renewals, but even if you forget to renew it and you put it on a counter and you ignore it, you just don't see it because you put it someplace weird, you're going to have 3 weeks, then 28 days, basically 3 weeks, then another 60 days till you're in collections. There's a lot of time
to do that. But
yeah.
to talk about the money,
no.
No.
Great. Someone has asked, can you tell us what positive results you've seen since going fine free?
People are a lot happier.
Yeah, I was going to say, the PR, I mean, as long as it's well articulated, and going back to those staff people who get a little bit resentful, the neighbors who get a little bit resentful, the board that worries, if you get all of those things, you find a way to address all of those in differing ways. Mm-hmm. Okay. But the PR that you do and that comes out of this is phenomenal. The other thing, it goes back to that question about who are we alienating and who are we disenfranchising. By and large, it's going to be young people and poor people that are impacted the most by overdue fines. They are the people that don't get to. And when you get the opportunity to say, don't worry about that. Are you worrying about your electric bill? Yes. Are you worrying about your groceries? Yes. Are you worrying about all these other things? Yeah. But here, you're not. You are actually having the opportunity to create this sense of community that we talk about, but very rarely have the chance to participate in and develop because of all of these other things. We are that place. And for me, that is, well, I mean, it has helped bring back a sense of love for libraries. Not that I ever lost it, but it's helped it to grow, that this is the place they can come. Mm-hmm. This is the place they can be safe. They can be welcome. And that thing they don't have, money, doesn't matter. So the PR is, yeah.
Yeah. Something else I've read, and we're going to, at this point, you're in the land of the anecdotal, and I acknowledge that. But I tend to work at the circulation desk Monday mornings when we have our lap sit. Not all Mondays, but a lot. And so we have big numbers for our lap sit, and you're talking about the very young kids. And I've talked with mothers, some of which have been on our board of directors, that said they didn't come to our library when they had very little kids because of the fines. They were afraid. Because like I said, it could ratchet, if you check out 80 kids' books, it could ratchet up quickly if you forget for a week. Now they don't have that fear. They don't have to worry about it. So the kids are in the library. And then I wonder, well, if their earliest memories of the library are lap sits or story times at our library and they're coming, then as they grow up to become adults, those warm and fuzzy memories will follow them, and they might be more likely to be pro-library
Do all the
taxes or
things,
something
yeah.
like that. But if their parents said, we're not bringing you there because we can't afford it, because God forbid we forget the 80 books for a week, and it's just astronomical, then they'll never form those bonds. Now, can I prove that? No. But it's something I think about.
Well, and it's something
Yeah.
that makes sense too. So if you think about who is checking out the most whatever. So people who are checking out the most DVDs are generally people that don't have access necessarily to the internet, so they're not going to be streaming Netflix or whatever. They don't have cable or satellite. So they're going to check out, and oftentimes that's because they can't afford it. So they're going to check out all these DVDs. Okay. Are they going to be late at some point? Yes. Who are checking out the largest volume of books? Well, people that are checking out short books, like picture books and easy readers. They're people with children or people who are learning to read or whatever. It's when an adult comes up and they have a stack of 10 adult books, we're like, man, you read a lot. It's not unusual for a family to come up, family with children to come up and have 50 books. If they have, we live in Amish country, they have all of their 5 kids there and they're getting their books for school. I mean, you think about, they're the ones who, if they're overdue a day in Evergreen, 25 cents times 50, well, they're already, I mean, that's a good meal. So those are, again, the people that we want in there using that, and we're the ones who are hit hardest by overdue funds.